Welcome to Conversations, Lehman College's series of discussions with major theater and musical figures of our time. Our guest today, for the second of a two-part chat, is the celebrated director Francesca Zambello. Welcome back, Francesca.
Thank you.
Our opening clip, of course, again, were of your beautiful production of The Little Prince, Houston Grand Opera in 2003, libretto by Nicholas Wright, composer Rachel Portman, from the book of Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. The Little Prince was Nathaniel Irvin. The pilot was Teddy Tahoe Rhodes. The fox, Marie Lenormand. La Rose, so the Rose is Kristen Ryerson. Now you are unusual among directors in that you like to work on new pieces.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'd much rather have the composer, the lyricist, or the author there as part of the process.
Living.
Oh, yeah.
This is remarkable.
I mean, no, I know. I mean, a lot of opera, you're dealing with the dead, so you have to sort of conjure them at night. But basically, working with living writers is, I think, one of the most exciting things that you could have as a director. The fact that you have the person there, you can work on the piece together. It's about dialogue. It's about collaboration. And so, for me, I've done about 25 world premieres of operas and, at this point, several new musicals. So it's really, I think, one of the most stimulating parts of my world is to have the writers there.
Many people in our audience would not know how unusual this predilection of yours is. That a lot of people feel that the height would be to do the 12,000th production of Carmen. Nothing bad about Carmen, but people have really done Carmen. And it's a wonderful thing to do.
I mean,
Carmen.
I've been an advocate of new music for much of my career, whether it be opera or, I mean, music theaters, of course, most musicals now are new musicals. So that's not as different as it is in opera. But in opera, I've found that I've had a connection with a good 15 or 20 authors and composers over the years, working on new pieces, and it's really, it goes back before even the visually conceiving a production. You're at the very beginning. I mean, I've worked with, for example, that Little Prince, Rachel Portman. Before she even started, she came to see me because Philip Glass sent her to me. I'd worked with Philip on a couple of things, and he said, go see Francesca because she will help you do a new opera. She'd never written one. And she shared something that strikes a big chord for me, which is to write music that is for new audiences, families, and children. As I'm sure you saw in the clip, there are also a lot of kids in the show. And that's a very important issue for me, is to make theater that is going to reach new audiences.
Available.
Absolutely.
That's a very new, it's a classic thing for opera to do, but it seems to be, and music theater to do, but it seems to be reinventing itself now.
Well,
Thank God.
I mean, that's The Little Prince. We've had great luck with it. It's been done in 10 different theaters.
Right.
It was filmed by the BBC and PBS. It's been shown on national TV. It comes around. It's on a DVD. So for me, it's really to try and reach audiences, I think, is a responsibility as an artist.
We closed the last part with Florencia en el Amazonas by Daniel Catan, libretto by Marcela Fuentes Beren. that was based on a piece of.
Well, it was based on, she collaborated with the great writer Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And when we evolved that story, before the music was even written, Marcella, Daniel, and I went to stay with Marquez in Colombia. And the story is an original story. The title for all the non-Spanish speakers is Florencia on the Amazon. Florencia was a famous opera diva. And so the story was really about this woman who was on this boat looking for her lover who she had lost before she went off to make a big career. And he had gone into the jungle to search for this rare butterfly. And what ends up happening in the end is that she becomes the butterfly and is reunited with him spiritually. And it's a very Marquezian story. And so what was great was we went to Colombia, we stayed on his ranch, and to get to his ranch we had to fly there in a helicopter with armed guards because he had so many death threats. But meeting him was really a career highlight. I mean, one of the great thinkers and writers of our time. And that's the thing, is that I've had a chance to work with such a wide range of writers, from Philip Glass to Alan Menken to Rachel, just so many different kinds of writers and composers. And that's, you know, that's something that doesn't normally happen. You
like to be involved from the inception.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
That's an exciting thing to do. Working in my other guise as a playwright, this is the normal thing, but not in opera and even they're repeating so many old musicals, so it's becoming a little like the old world of opera. But I think that now, I mean, right now I personally am working on developing several new musicals with different writers. And for me, it's not just about the executing a piece. It's really about being involved in the conception and how to help writers often realize how a piece can become more theatrical, how to tell their story better, how to be there as a sounding board. I think a lot of my job is almost a kind of editor or almost a cinematographer to help them realize what to focus on in a piece and how to best make their material come off the page. How do you work? I don't know how to phrase this even. Right. Sounds like a scary question is coming. No. How do you work with the libretto? You mean an existing libretto or a new libretto? A new libretto, let's say. Well, generally the process will be I will work with the composer and the librettist or lyricist, depending. It's all a matter of semantics, really. Yeah. First, on just the story arc. No matter if it's an opera or a musical, if you do not have the story arc right, or the spine, I call it the skeleton actually, then everything else is a disaster. Right. I mean, most people don't realize that if things are not right in the beginning, they will never be right later. Prima le parola, poi la musica. Yeah. Which is first the word, then the music. And so often in theater we see where production values, big production values, try and cover up mistakes of pieces. And you have got to have the spine right from the get-go. And that's why I spend so much time with the authors, usually, in the beginning of the process, to be sure that the story is right, that the character arc, the journeys that every character is going to make are going to work. Because once you start committing things to paper, in musical terms, yes, of course things change, but you've got to have the skeleton there. I always say this, if you don't have the skeleton, you can't make all the blood, the passion, the heart, and then later what I do, which is hanging all the clothing on it and everything that goes on top of it. And so it's so important to have that very beginning right. Otherwise, everything else, it won't work. In addition to working on new pieces, you also have worked on classic, I guess you call them classic new pieces, like Porgy and Bess. I thought we should show a piece of your production of Porgy and Bess. Great. Roll it, please.
and not there, and nothing's plenty for me. I got no car, got no mule, got no misery. Nothing with plenty of plenty, got a lock on his door. Wait, somebody's going to rob what is out to making more. What for?
That's an ending, isn't it?
It doesn't get better than Gershwin's Porgy and Bess.
No.
It doesn't. That is our greatest American opera, by far. It's a triumph. It's a towering piece.
It certainly is. Who was playing Porgy?
That was Gordon Hawkins, who's one of our great American baritones, who sings everything from Rigoletto and Scarpia to is a wonderful Porgy, as you can see there.
And Bess was who?
Bess in that was Laquita Mitchell,
Okay.
who is a wonderful young singer who now is singing things like Madama Butterfly. So that was just a few years ago, but I know her voice has grown in leaps and bounds since then.
And that was Jermaine Smith, Sport and Life, no?
Yes.
Okay. How does this classic American opera compare to the newer works being written now, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, Gershwin is. I mean, you don't get better than that. So, I think you can't compare a piece to that. I think that, in a way, Porgy is really the beginning of American opera. I think, in terms of the fact that it set a standard that very few pieces have come up against or come up to, because it has managed to combine a uniquely American story with music that is incredibly accessible, yet is opera, and is something that has a moral bigger than itself. It's simple people who live on Catfish Row, yet it tells a story that's much bigger. And that's what opera does best. That's what all the great operas do. They take a simple tale, whether it be La Boheme, whether it be Mozart's work, and they often are about real people, but they expand because of the emotions involved and because of the story, the moral, or the bigger message behind it. And of course, the other fact is what was amazing, that Gershwin insisted that be cast completely with an African-American cast. What a amazing thing to think that in 1936, he insisted on that. And that when it had its premiere, that's how it was, and that's how it's been since then.
And that changed opera forever.
I mean, Benjamin Britten could not have existed had he not seen these pieces. I mean, there's just how it influenced so many people in the latter part of the 20th century. Its roots are deep.
Which is my next piece to discuss, which is Billy Budd.
Right.
What a wonderful cue. Roll Billy Budd, please.
What's the captain like? Starivier, we call him. Starivier, Starivier, you call him. Starivier, the best of them all. He's a triumph and a giant in battle. A one to the against the French. The French, the French, the French. They've caught me by Holmes' con. They've caught me by Holmes' con. meine Plank, so I'll shake a friendly hand ere I sleep. But no, it is dead that I'll be to sleep. William Byrd, you have been found by the court-martial guilty of striking your superior officer. You have further been found guilty of murder. In accordance with the aforesaid articles of war, you are condemned to death by hanging from the yard arm. God bless you. God bless you.
How did you come up with that particular hanging scene? What?
Well, in the opera, Britain suggests that the hanging happened off stage, not in view. But when you go back and read Melville, Melville's so descriptive about it, and often when you're directing these pieces, you go back to the source material, and you often take a lot of the source material
Right.
and put it into the piece visually. And in this case with Alison Chitty, the designer, she and I felt that seeing the hanging was imperative because it instigates the next scene, which is a revolt from all the crew on the boat. And so, like all things in theater, you figure out a way to do it. In that case, it's simple theater tricks. He's wearing a harness on his back, and there's a noose which looks like a real noose that has a pull which goes up around his neck, and you see it do that, but it has a stop, and then he drops.
Did you come into the first rehearsal knowing that's what you wanted to do, or?
Yes, I mean we worked it out. We call it, we tech it is what we do. We teched
Yeah.
it with not the real singer. When we first did that production in Geneva, I remember we did a lot of rehearsals.
An intern.
And well, it was actually my assistant. And he's still here to tell, and he ended up actually helping put it on. It's been in a number of cities, Geneva, Paris, London, and a lot of cities in America, and he's ended up helping me put it on in all these other places. But we've thankfully never had an incident about that moment.
There's a certain look about all your productions. They look iconic. The lighting is iconic. How do you, clearly you're giving directions to a disparate group of designers, or you're not using the same designer.
No, I
but there's a unity of looks.
Well, I think that for me, obviously, the visual world is crucial. I mean, you need to make a visual statement for every production. Every story has to be held in something. I always say it needs a world to live in. And so I try to always choose the right collaborators who are going to help realize that world. And it really evolves out of our discussions together. I don't always have like, it's going to look like this, because you never know that. You have a feeling, but you don't know what it is. And it's really through the design process, which can be quite lengthy, where you evolve how things are going to look visually. And again, it's a give and take. It's the same thing with a lighting designer whose work comes later, is that I can help make suggestions, but their job is about painting with light and about helping us understand where to focus and where to look and how to not only illuminate something from outside, but illuminate from within. Lighting has its own subtext, the way that scenery and costumes do. It's not the shell, it's really what comes from within.
Do you come to them with a descriptive sentence of what you want, or do you make a face, or they
Yeah.
get to know them, or
Well, I mean,
what's the
I have a
process?
group of collaborators of, I'd say, a dozen different designers who I've worked with on different projects over the years, and you find a language, you find a, but it always is based on, I generally have an idea. I mean, in the case of the Billy Budd that you just saw, at one point, it takes place on a very realistic English battleship, yet I knew that I wanted it to have the trappings, the physical trappings, that the men would look like they're wearing uniforms, but you may have noticed actually they're just the shape of a uniform. They don't have any bars or anything like
Right.
that. So it was really to suggest the period without being historical, because I find often history is not theater. History can impede theater, can impede the emotional language of theater. And that with Allison, she and I both we kept trying to find a way to suggest a boat without having it be a real boat. And so we ended up actually with a great big square, which opened and closed and moved, which was like a floating island. At one point, Melville calls the boat a floating island. And that was actually how that idea evolved for that. So you try to find clues in source material or in artwork of the period or in different things that may inspire you, the political surroundings. I mean, everything is different. I mean, that images of Catfish Row, when Peter Davison, the set designer, and I started on that, I knew that I wanted to present these people in a respectful way, but also to make it feel like Catfish Row was a kind of, in one way, a prison, that it held them. They couldn't get out, but that in the end it would break apart, which is what you saw suddenly. It became very bright, like daylight suddenly streamed in. So we based it on a kind of fish factory from the South, from the 1930s. So again, you try to find images that suggest your world, and then you theatricalize them.
Do you see any hard and fast lines between Grand Opera and Broadway? If you see those lines, what are they?
I think those lines are breaking down. I think that in a way they were much closer really up until the invention of the microphone. I think that all the way through the 50s, that performers on Broadway, and music, there was bigger orchestras, bigger voices, that music theater really was our American opera. And then in a way, we kind of went away from that, I think, for the last 50 years. And now I actually think we're coming back together, that American opera and American musical theater writing are joining forces again. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that people growing up who write music now were influenced by Rodgers and Hammerstein, George Gershwin, Cole Porter. That language can very much
And
become
opera.
yeah, exactly, can very much become their language of today.
Where do you think opera is going now?
Opera is
Towel in the handbasket. No.
All right. Well, I mean, opera's in a difficult place right now. I think that we're just learning how to really make opera accessible. I know everybody throws around that word accessible, but opera right now is not accessible. It's expensive. It's in buildings that are not necessarily warming and opening and like saying, come on in, the way that theaters sometimes are more, you feel more comfortable often going into a Broadway theater. It feels more open, available. The doors open and they're right on the street. In an opera house, you often have to go through a big setting to get into it, and that setting may not be the
Like
most...
a museum.
Yeah, well, exactly. It may not be the most welcoming. And so I think that now everyone in the opera field is trying, obviously through the internet, through media, through making opera more available in widescreen, through doing new works that speak to a wider audience, cutting down pieces, making them shorter, making them... I mean, there are a million different... Were there a million, it would be better. There are a few ways that I think everyone is trying to make it reach out to a new audience. I don't think opera is for everyone, nor should it be. The same way that almost football's not for everyone. But I do think that we have to get serious, and people are serious now, about making it reach a wider audience the way that musicals do. And I think that, again, we need to go back to this tradition of that musicals are our own opera. Puccini was as popular as Andrew Lloyd Webber in his own time. And I think that we could get to that in our own time. But I think it takes a kind of a real collaboration between artists, audiences, people who pay for shows to get on, through a whole variety of different groups to come together and really evolve what is going to happen in this century.
Francesca, believe it or not, our time is up once again. I'm sad to say that, but that's what they're telling me.
Okay.
This has been an outstanding conversation. Thank you, Francesca Zambello, and our home and studio audiences for joining us. And we hope to see you again soon for further conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.